It's good to be here at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, right in the heart of our city. And we're in the midst of this series focused on our city and on this city. And at Christ Community, one of our values is that we believe we're designed to give ourselves away in our neighborhood, our city, and the world. And so we're looking at all these different ways in which that works itself out in our city, in the arts and hospitality and those kind of things. But as we look at our city, whether it's here in Kansas City or another city in the United States or across the globe, one of the big issues that we face is the issue of poverty, and seeing that that lack of flourishing in those kinds of ways in our city. And as a pastor, as I've interacted with people, I know Christians, people at Christ Community, we want to be involved and we want to help. We want to see poverty alleviated. But I also feel like it's one of those areas where it's so easy for really well-intentioned, really well-meaning people to make mistakes in that. And sort of at best, we end up doing things that just aren't effective. They don't actually really help the issues, or at worst, they make it worse. They actually end up hurting the very people that we're trying to help. And so, Stan, JT, as you're bringing your expertise to this, I would love to hear from you today just a little bit about what are some of the mistakes you see people making, really well-meaning, intentional people making when they try to think about or engage in alleviating poverty. So, Stan, you've been a pastor here in Kansas City for 30 years and worked in the heart of our city in this. What are some of the ways you've seen that?
Well, I think I would start with defining poverty, because I think one of our biggest mistakes is we don't really know what it is. And so we are acting on our perceptions. Our definition of poverty is like a four-legged stool. If you took the stool and you wanted to balance it, you would need, first of all, resources. And I think many of us see resources as connected with poverty, but also there's access. Do I have access to basic elements, everything from a laundromat to a banking facility and to a grocery store? Do I have the access? The second thing is, do I have opportunity? If I get into places where there are needs that are evident, do I have opportunities to advance? And do I have a sense of well-being in that opportunity? And then lastly, authority. I need to be able to make decisions about my life, decisions about my children, decisions about things that are going on. If any of those four things are missing, then that stool is off-centered, and then you have the probability of poverty. With most of us, we go in and we try to fix one or the other, and so we kind of miss the opportunity to really see stability, which can lead us out of poverty. The other part of that is, I think that when we do go in and we look at that stool, we will look at how broken it is rather than its opportunity to be fixed. And so if I go in and I look at stool and say, well, that leg is gone, it's no good. Or either I can look at, boy, that leg is gone, all it needs is that leg. Then I have a different approach. I think I gave an example before in many situations where when I first went looking for my first car, I looked at the car and I said, man, all I need to do is fix this, 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 and this, and this, and that car will be running. And my mom looked at the car and says, you might as well forget it, because that's broke, and that broke. We saw the same thing, but one of us had an asset approach and the other one had a deficient approach. Those two elements, I think, make us, our definition and our misunderstanding of that, and then secondly, our approach to poverty is part of what contributes to the deficiency in ways that we make it worse.
JT, I wonder, as you've worked a lot in these spaces here in Kansas City, but also with Hope across the globe as well. How would you add to that? What would you bring to this in terms of what are the mistakes we make? What are the blind spots?
Well, a couple thoughts come to mind. First off, I love Stan's metaphors of the stool in the car, because I think it's not only do we have eyes to see the ways we could support the stool and fix the car, but it's also understanding the fundamental purpose of the stool in the car, right? It's one thing to just go in and fix things, but it's another to say, to stand back and say, man, this stool was made to serve us. And anywhere I need a stool, It's like the car wasn't meant to get fixed; it was meant to drive, And I think, and I've worked with Stan enough to know that at the end of the day, that's our heart as we talk about poverty, is not how do we fix this broken thing, but how do we see humans flourish? Like, what is God's design for human flourishing in the world? And, honestly, it's kind of a buzzword that gets tossed around a lot, but, really, like, fundamentally, how is God's design playing out? How are we really living into that? And how are our lives connecting with others in ways that we're collaborating together for flourishing, And I think if I were to boil it down to one mistake that I've seen, and I myself have made over the years, but these days, if I were to boil it down to one thing that I think is kind of a typical kind of rookie mistake, it ties to a kind of category confusion, where people come in and they try to solve poverty at the symptom level, and I think this gets really this is very relevant whether you are trying to solve poverty or whether you're trying to parent well or design or program well. The minute you start down a symptom solution, this is dead on arrival, right? And I think it's tricky because poverty symptoms are so disruptive, they're so in our face that it's like it wants to hijack attention, But we have to go underneath that. We have to take a minute to actually dig into the essence and nature of poverty. It's way more multifaceted. Underneath of it is actually a relational paradigm, a way that there's been usually anemic or dysfunctional relationships so we go quickly to this material response, but I think that's typically down kind of a symptoms solution track, and it's super unhelpful.
So it's almost like, okay, is my goal to fix the water pump on the car or to make the car run better?
Right, and to go drive.
Right, so with poverty, I think we are looking for the water pump. I'm gonna fix that one thing so the leak will go away and the light will go off.
Well, it keeps it real clean, keeps it real contained, I don't have to get messy.
And whether the car rides better or not is not even a part of what I think you know.
So, JT, how are you approaching that differently now? As you've grown, you've learned, we're learning this. So how are you thinking about that differently now today than you were 15, 20 years ago?
About once a week, on my way to church on Sunday mornings, I drive by 71 Highway and Swope Parkway, and I meet up with Patrick, who is a disabled, homeless veteran. And 20 years ago, I think I would have looked at Patrick and essentially thought of him as an illustration of poverty. He's a guy who, and in a really kind way, right? But he's a guy who's down on his luck, and he was needy for relief and support. I would have been sophisticated enough to say it's not just handing him, material goods, but probably needs some education, some support, But fundamentally, it was about looking for the water pump, right? Like, what do I need to plug and play, And these days, when I drive by Patrick, and in fact sometimes have conversation with Patrick, what I see is not an illustration of poverty, but I see an illustration of a man who's been on the receiving end of a cluster of disadvantage. I mean, that's a definition that actually some poverty scholars have given to me, and I think it's helpful because there's not just an individual reality, but Patrick has been on the backside of trauma. He has woken up into a life where dysfunctional or anemic relationships have been his reality, and at the end of the day, his own idea of himself has been shaped by these structures and systems, And if it was just one thing, Patrick could probably live to fight another day, right? But I mean, the image I think of is that children's story of like the giant who's bound up by ropes on the shore, and one little thing, this guy, he can lift his arm and he's free. But you start getting that web, that cluster of disadvantage. And again, at the bullseye of that is anemic relational realities. We're trapped then.
So we've talked here about ways that this can go wrong. And there's so much to think about, learn here. But I just wonder if each of you would give us what's like one next step we can take in some of those practical ways just to begin doing this well, because that's what we want. JT, what would you say?
Well, I mean, what comes to mind immediately for me is just this simple idea that we're not able to lead someone to a place we've never been, you know. And I think one of the challenges for us in the social location, in the Western context where we find ourselves, is that we wake up into a materialistic worldview, you know. And so, you know, what's that they say? If you have a hammer, everything's a nail.
Right,
you know?
right, exactly.
And I think this is a great example where it's like, if this is the worldview, then everything that's going to solve it ties back to material goods or whatever, you know. And the fact is, no, like we've got to get a lot more honest about who really is God and who really has the sufficiency and the fullness to lead toward flourishing, you know, and even how do we grow more and more into interdependent places where I'm uniquely bringing what I have to bring. Hopefully it's not just material, right? You know, hopefully there are other ways I'm exploring that. And I just think, but then I'm letting you bring what you bring, and so I want to hear that. I want to hear the expert.
You know, when you say that, I think that if I think that my riches, and if I think all those things that make me who I am are material, then you're right. Then everything, you know, like my hammer, everything's gonna be a nail. I do think we focus that way, including the homeless, and including those who are poor and in poverty. God has called all of us, in my opinion, to be stewards of everything that He's given us. So everything that God has given me is not mine. It is for me to use for His kingdom desire. And so
it didn't come from you.
Right, yeah. And so here's the one thing I think that we can really capture is that the evidence of God's passionate desire for unity is made up in the diverse demographic of people. And so therefore, when you look at the book of Acts, when you look at anywhere you look, God brought this demographic together, and then everybody recognized that everything that they had belonged to the betterment of other people. And so God didn't give it to me. God didn't give me whatever riches I have and then not give it to that person because He didn't want that person to have it. He just understood that the value that that person could bring to my life, I could only get in unity with them, and vice versa. And so when we say we're going to help the poor and we're going to do all those different kinds of things, we're doing things. Well, all I'm really doing is serving God based on His desire for unity and the demographic that He brought me into.
Yeah, that's good.
And as I let that play out, then we'll begin to see poverty from a very, very different perspective, and I think a much more biblical perspective.
Yeah. Thank you, Stan, Jeanette, for sharing with us and just being a part of this conversation. I've learned so much from both of you on this and so many things. So thank you for being here this afternoon to share with us.
Absolutely.